How do you react when your own son stands in front of you and says you are not welcome at Christmas in a home you helped him keep? How do you answer when he says his real family picture does not include you? This is how I walked out, stayed calm, and then watched everything change when my phone later showed 25 missed calls. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ethan Cole, and I learned this year that you can be written out of Christmas by your own son while standing in the middle of his living room holding a box of cookies. I parked a block away from Ryan's townhouse that morning. The street was already crowded with cars, some of them I did not know. I sat in my old sedan for a moment and watched the front door. People went in and out, carrying wrapped boxes and trays covered with foil. The windows had soft lights in them, warm and golden. From the outside, it looked like a greeting card. On the passenger seat beside me, there was a tin with the cookies I had baked the night before and a small box with 2 books for Leo and Ava. I had wrapped the books myself, slowly and neatly. One was a simple picture book about animals for Ava. The other was a children's history book about explorers for Leo. He liked it when I talked about old stories from my teaching days, so I had chosen it with care. I took a breath, picked up the gifts, and walked up the path. As soon as I reached the door, I could hear music inside and the sound of many voices, cheerful and busy. For a second, I felt hopeful. I told myself that whatever tension there had been this year, we were still family. People said things when they were tired, I thought. Maybe today would be better. Ryan opened the door. He was in a new sweater that still had the sharp folds of something just taken out of a box. His hair was styled in a way I had never seen when he still lived with me. He gave me a quick look, then smiled in a polite, thin way. He said that he was glad I made it early and that they were still getting ready. I stepped inside. The living room was full of decorations. There were white and gold ornaments on the tree, matching ribbons, and a table set up along one wall with small snacks and drinks. A camera stood on a tripod facing the couch, and Mia moved around it, checking angles and adjusting the lights on a ring lamp. She wore a coordinated outfit that matched the children's sweaters. It made the room feel like a stage. Leo saw me first. He ran from the hallway with a paper snowflake in his hand. He shouted my name and jumped into my side with both arms. Ava followed, slower, and she wrapped herself around my leg. I felt their warmth through my worn trousers. In that moment, everything in me loosened. Whatever else was going on, I thought, this part was still real. Mia walked over and greeted me with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She said that it was nice of me to come by for a little while because they had a very packed day. Behind her, I saw her parents, Victor and Helena, sitting on the couch. Victor gave me a small nod. Helena smiled politely and said that it was good to see me, then went back to her tablet, where she was scrolling through photo ideas. I handed the cookie tin to Mia and the small box with the books to Leo. I told Leo that one of the gifts was for him and one was for his sister, and he cheered and hugged the box. Mia thanked me and said that they would open those later because right now they were staying focused on the main shoot. She waved her hand toward the camera and the neat couch. I looked around for a spot to put my coat. There were new coats hanging on the hooks by the door, some of them I did not recognize. I found a free space, hung mine up, and tried to stay out of the way. I watched the children move around the tree, adding small decorations. I noticed that there were name tags on some of the ornaments. I saw one with the word Grandpa written in Leo's messy handwriting, hanging near the top. While the kids worked, Ryan and Mia stood near the coffee table with Victor and Helena and went through the plan for the day. Mia said that the big Christmas lunch at the restaurant would start at noon, that they would take a set of family photos before they left, and that they had a tight schedule. She also said that the restaurant staff were used to hosting full families, and that everything needed to look clean and simple. Victor asked about the seating. He wanted to know where everyone would sit and how many people were coming from their side. Mia said that her brother and his wife would join, along with a couple they knew well. She talked about table sizes and mentioned that the restaurant had said they could only fit a certain number in the private room. I listened from a few steps away, hands folded in front of me. I waited for my name to come up. I told myself not to press. It was their event. I was just happy to see the kids for a while. I repeated that thought in my mind like a lesson. Leo came over and tugged my sleeve. He held up a drawing he had made. It showed a small house with a tree beside it and 3 figures next to it. He told me it was Christmas at Grandpa's house and pointed to the figure with gray hair. I laughed softly and told him it looked wonderful. Mia saw the drawing and took it from his hand with a quick motion. She said that it was very sweet, but that today they would focus on the new plan. Then the talk about the lunch became more direct. Ryan said that the restaurant had a limit on how many could sit at the main table. He said that Mia's parents were coming, and her brother, and that the children needed space too. He said that the staff at the restaurant liked to keep big gatherings clean and simple. I heard my own name only when Ryan turned slightly and looked in my direction. He said that this year they were going to try a different approach. He said that he and Mia wanted to have a Christmas lunch that was just the core group, and that they thought it might be less tense if I had my own quiet day at home. The words came out smooth, like he had practiced them. He compared it to a small break, and said that maybe later they could meet for coffee. He said that this would be healthier for everyone. He did not look at me for very long while he said it. He focused on the table, on a napkin he was folding between his fingers. The room went quiet in a strange way. The music still played softly, but it felt far away. Victor cleared his throat and looked back at his tablet. Helena smiled in an uncertain way and took a sip of her drink. Mia pressed her lips together and touched Ryan's shoulder as if to say that he was doing the right thing. No one else spoke. I stood there with my hands by my sides. I felt the heat rise in my face, not from anger, but from the sudden weight of other people's eyes. I looked at Leo and Ava. Leo frowned as if he did not understand. Ava's fingers clung to my hand. I did not raise my voice. Years in a classroom had taught me that raising your voice was often the weakest move. I asked Ryan, in a steady tone, if he was saying that he did not want me at the Christmas lunch. He said that he wanted to avoid confusion and old tension, that it was only for this year, and that he did not want any scenes in front of Mia's family or in front of the camera. He added something about how people changed and how new traditions were important. He said that he hoped I would understand and not take it personally. It was, he said, just easier this way. There are moments when you can feel a part of your life close like a door. Standing there, with the children's drawing in Mia's hand and the camera waiting on its tripod, I felt that door swing shut. The sound was not loud. It was more like the soft click of a lock. I bent down and hugged Leo and Ava. I told Leo that I loved his drawing and that he and his sister would have a wonderful day. I told Ava that she looked beautiful in her little sweater. I did not say anything more to them. They did not need to carry the weight of those words. I straightened up and told Ryan and Mia that I did not want to be where I was not wanted. I thanked them for letting me see the children that morning. I said that I hoped the lunch went well. I kept my tone level, without shaking. That was something I could still control. Then I picked up my coat from the hook, slipped it on, and walked to the door. No one tried to stop me. At the last second, Leo called after me and asked why I was leaving before the photos. I did not turn around. I knew that if I looked back, something inside me might break in a way that would show on my face. I stepped outside into the cold air. The sky was a flat gray, and the light made everything look a little faded. Behind me, the music started up again, and the door shut. From the sidewalk, the house looked just as warm as before, but now it felt far away, like a picture in a book about someone else's life. I walked back to my car slowly, holding my keys tight so they would not shake in my hand. When I got inside, I closed the door and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The silence was heavy, but it was my silence, not theirs. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the row of houses. Each one had a wreath or some kind of decoration. In another year, I might have admired the effort. Today, they all seemed to blend together. My phone lay face down on the passenger seat. I picked it up and pressed the button. The screen lit up, bright in the dim interior. At the top of the screen, a small reminder appeared, one I had almost forgotten I had set months ago. It said that in early January, I should review the family trust with Mark. The words sat there, simple and clear, glowing on the glass while the townhouse lights flickered in my rearview mirror. I drove home on quiet streets that did not feel like Christmas. There were lights on many houses, but I did not really see them. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, and my mind went to an old habit from my teaching days. I started listing facts. Fact 1, my son had just told me, in front of 2 other adults and a camera, that I should have my own quiet Christmas away from his family. Fact 2, he was planning a big lunch at a restaurant with both sides of Mia's family, and I was not in the plans. Fact 3, my own grandchildren had asked why I was leaving before the photos. By the time I parked outside my building, those 3 facts felt sharper than the cold. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, partly to steady my breathing, partly because I needed those few extra seconds before I stepped back into my small apartment. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old books. I hung my coat on the same hook I had used for 10 years, placed my keys in the little dish by the door, and set my phone on the kitchen counter. I did everything slowly, almost like I was following instructions someone else had written. On the kitchen table, there was still a mug with a ring of dried tea at the bottom and an open notebook where I had written a list for the day. At the top of the list, in my careful handwriting, were the words, "Visit Ryan and kids." Under that, I had written, "Maybe invite them here after lunch." I looked at that second line for a long time, then closed the notebook. I heated the remaining soup from last night and sat down at the table. The room was silent except for the faint humming of the refrigerator. Above the table, there were framed photos on the wall. In most of them, Ryan was a child. In two, my late wife, Clara, smiled at the camera with her head tilted, as if listening. I thought about the first Christmas after she passed. It had been just Ryan and me in our old house, sitting at a table that felt too big. I had tried to cook everything the way she used to. The potatoes were a little too dry, and the pie crust was too hard around the edges, but Ryan had said that it was the best Christmas meal he had ever had. He had been 17 then. He had cried into his plate when he thought I was not looking. Back then, he had hugged me every time he left the house and said that I was all he had. I remembered those words clearly. They had helped me get through many long days in the classroom and too many quiet nights in that house. After I finished my soup, I took one of the framed photos down from the wall. It was from an older Christmas, years before Mia, years before influencer photos and restaurant lunches. We were in a rented hall, standing near a tree that leaned a little to one side. Clara was holding a tray of cookies. Ryan was maybe 10, with messy hair and a crooked smile. I was behind them, hands on their shoulders. I turned the frame over and checked the back. In Clara's handwriting, neat and looping, it said, "First Christmas as just our little family." That had been after my parents passed. We had already seen what it felt like to lose people at a table. I set the frame back on the shelf and leaned against the counter. My mind went back further, to the staff room at the school where I had taught for nearly 30 years. That room had been small, with brown cabinets and a fridge that buzzed too loudly. The chairs did not match, and the coffee was always weak. But it had been a kind of home. I remembered sitting there with a stack of essays one afternoon, years ago, while Clara sat opposite me with a folder full of numbers. She had worked part-time at the library then and handled our finances with quiet care. She had said that we needed to think about the future, about what would happen if one of us got sick, about Ryan's studies. I had made a joke about still paying off the car by the time Ryan finished university. She had smiled and told me not to joke. Then she had opened the folder and shown me the small savings we had, the life insurance for my parents, and a list of options a friend of hers had suggested. A trust, she had said, would keep things simple for Ryan if anything happened to us. I remembered how heavy that word had felt at the time, trust. I was a history teacher. I liked solid, simple structures, but legal forms were not my favorite topic. I had told her that I did not understand how it all worked. She had said that was why we would talk to someone who did understand, that someone had been Mark. He had been a friend of Clara's cousin, a lawyer who came to our house one evening with a box of papers. Ryan had been in his room, working on a project. Mark had sat at our small dining table, explained everything in simple language, and drawn little diagrams on a notepad. He had said that a family trust could hold the house, any savings we built up, and later, if we were lucky, maybe even help with a home for Ryan. He had said that it was a way to protect our work from sudden changes and to make sure things went where we wanted them to go, not just where some forum decided. I remembered one thing he had said very clearly. He had looked at me and said that, as the grantor and future trustee, I would keep control as long as I was alive and able. That meant I could decide how and when things were used. He had said that it was about more than money. It was about values. He had even used that word, values. I walked from the kitchen to the living room and sank into my old armchair. The fabric was worn, and one armrest had a small tear near the seam. I let my head rest against the back and stared at the shelf in front of me, lined with books and more photos. I thought about Ryan as a boy. He used to run into my classroom after school, back when Clara worked late shifts at the library. He would sit at the back, pretending to do homework while listening to me talk to students who stayed after for help. He had once told me that I made history sound like a story, not a list of dates. He had said that he wanted to live a big story too, not a small one. When he met Mia, he had been excited in a way I had not seen since he was younger. He had brought her to my house for dinner one evening. She had been warm and friendly. She had spoken about her plans, her goals, the way she wanted to build a life she could share online. I had not really understood what that meant, but I had nodded and listened. Later, after Leo was born, they had come to me with worried faces. They had said that the rent on their apartment was too high, that they wanted a stable place for the baby, that they were looking at a townhouse but could not afford the down payment. Ryan had said that he hated asking me for help, that he felt like he was failing his own family by not being able to give them everything they needed. I had told him that asking me was not failing. I had told him that parents saved so their children would not have to start from nothing. I had called Mark again, and we had gone through the trust, the savings, and the house I was living in at the time. I had agreed to use a large part of what Clara and I had put aside to help them. When we sat at the bank to sign the papers for the townhouse, Ryan had gripped my hand and said that he would never forget what I was doing. He had said that I was the reason his child would have a safe home. The bank officer had explained that the trust would technically own the property, with Ryan having the right to live there under certain terms. Ryan had nodded and said that he trusted me more than any bank. I remembered all of this now like a film, frame by frame. Each memory made the silence in my apartment feel heavier. I stood up and walked into the small room I used as a study. It held a desk, a bookshelf, and an old metal filing cabinet. On the desk was my laptop, a lamp, and a stack of papers I had been meaning to sort. I turned on the lamp. The soft light filled the room. For a moment, I just stood there and looked at the cabinet. The bottom drawer had a small lock. I had not opened it in a while. Most days, it was easier to let the papers sit, to tell myself that everything was fine, that I did not need to think about those structures until I was older. I knelt down, reached into the drawer of the desk, and took out a small key. It rested in my palm for a second, cool and light. Then I slid it into the lock and turned it. The drawer opened with a soft scrape. Inside were folders, each one labeled in my handwriting. One said, Cole Family Trust. Another said, Townhouse, Deed and Terms. A third said, Education Accounts, Leo and Ava. The sight of those names written by my own hand steadied me in a strange way. I took the folders out and placed them on the desk, but I did not open them yet. Instead, I sat down in the chair and just rested my hands on the covers. The cardboard felt firm under my fingers. In the quiet, my mind went back to more recent years. To short messages from Ryan canceling visits, to excuses about the children's schedules, to a comment he had made once about how my old apartment was not very camera-friendly, to the first time he had said that maybe I should not come to a gathering because it might be a bit much for everyone. At the time, I had told myself that he was stressed, that Mia was under a lot of pressure from her work, that people sometimes said clumsy things when they were tired. I had not written those moments down. I had not wanted to see them all at once. Now, though, I realize that stories look different when you view them as a whole instead of as single days. In the classroom, I used to tell my students that patterns were more important than isolated facts. Patterns told you what a society valued. I wondered why I had not applied that rule to my own life sooner. I opened the notebook on the desk and drew a line down the middle of the page. On one side, I wrote what I did for Ryan. On the other, I wrote how things are now. Under the first heading, I wrote, raised him alone after Clara, paid for school trips, helped with his first car, spent nights marking essays to save for him, set up the trust, used savings to help with townhouse. Under the second, I wrote, not invited to Christmas lunch, told to have quiet day alone, asked to stay out of photos, treated like a problem for image, used as a name on a trust card. The list was not long, but seeing the words on paper made my throat tighten. I put the pen down and closed my eyes for a moment. I did not feel rage. Rage was hot and wild. What I felt was something cooler and more settled. It was like when you finally see a pattern in a puzzle and realize it was there all along. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. After a while, I opened my eyes and picked up my phone from the desk. I scrolled through my contacts until I reached Mark's name. I did not press call yet. I just held my thumb over the screen and listened to the faint ticking of the wall clock. Outside, somewhere in the building, someone laughed. Music played in another apartment. The world moved on, as it always did. In my small study, with the trust folders under my hands, I understood something very simple. I had spent years teaching other people to look clearly at facts and learn from them. It was time I did the same for myself. I do not know how long I sat there with my thumb over Mark's name. The clock on the wall ticked softly. The folders on the desk waited. Nothing in the room moved except the small light from the phone screen on my hand. At some point, I realized that not calling was also a choice. If I did nothing, the pattern would go on. Next year, there would be a new excuse, a new event where I did not fit. The trust would stay as it was, built for a version of us that no longer existed. I took a slow breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times. For a moment, I thought I would get his voicemail, and part of me almost hoped for that. Then his voice came through, calm and familiar. He greeted me in an easy tone, the way you greet someone you have known a long time. I said that I was sorry to call close to the holidays. I told him that I needed to ask a question about the family trust. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, a little flatter than usual. He asked if everything was all right. I said that, in a practical sense, yes. No one was in trouble with health or work. I said that something had happened with Ryan and Christmas and that it had forced me to look at things I had avoided for years. On the phone, I kept the details short. I said that Ryan had decided to keep me separate from the main family gathering this year, and that this choice had been made very clearly in front of others. I used simple words. I did not talk about the drawing in Leo's hands, or the way Ava had clung to my leg. Those details stayed in my chest. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said that we had built the trust to protect me and to support Ryan, not to allow me to be stepped on. He said that the documents had options and that we had included them for a reason. He suggested that we meet after the weekend in his office to review everything calmly. He asked if I still had my copies of the paperwork. I said that they were on the desk in front of me. He sounded pleased at that and told me not to change anything on my own before we spoke. He said that we would go through it together, step by step, like we had done years ago. After we hung up, I placed the phone on the desk. The room felt a little different. Nothing physical had changed, but the conversation had drawn a thin, clear line in my mind, before that call and after it. I did not open the folders that night. Instead, I slid them back into the drawer, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. Sleep came in short pieces, broken by small, sharp memories. Ryan at 17, saying that I was all he had. Ryan at the bank, thanking me for the townhouse. Ryan that morning, telling me he wanted a quiet Christmas without old tension. In the morning, the winter light came through the thin curtains and turned the room pale. I made coffee and toast, then checked my phone. There was a short message from Ryan. He wrote that he hoped I had got home safely and that he wanted this Christmas to be peaceful. He said that he did not want any stress around the children. He added that he was sure I would understand. I stared at the words for a while and then set the phone down. There was nothing in that message that recognized what I might be feeling. It read more like a note to close a task on a list. Later that morning, I decided to do something simple. I wrapped a small book I had set aside for Leo, one I had forgotten to put in the first box. I told myself that I would drop it at Ryan's office, leave it with the receptionist, and then go to the library. I did not expect to speak with Ryan. I only wanted to make sure Leo got the book. The office building where Ryan worked was bright and new, with a glass front and a lobby full of pale wood and gray chairs. The company logo was on the wall in large letters. Young people in tidy clothes moved through the space with phones in their hands and badges on their shirts. I felt out of place as soon as I walked in. My coat was older. My shoes had more wear. I went up to the desk and told the receptionist that I wanted to leave a small package for Ryan Cole. I said that I was his father. The receptionist smiled politely and asked me to wait a moment while she checked if he was free. She made a call and spoke in a low voice. Then she looked up and said that Ryan was in a long online meeting and could not step away. She said that I could leave the package and she would make sure he got it. I thanked her and placed the book, neatly wrapped, on the counter. As I turned to leave, my eyes drifted toward the open space beyond the glass wall of the lobby. Through it, I could see rows of desks and a break area near a large window. At that moment, Ryan walked into the break area with 2 coworkers. He held a coffee cup, and he was smiling broadly. One of the coworkers said something, and they all laughed. Ryan checked his phone, then put it back in his pocket without any sign that he had heard a call or a message about me. I watched him for a few seconds. He looked confident, relaxed, completely at ease in this space. He looked like someone who belonged. There was no sign of the son who had once sat at the back of my classroom after school, listening quietly to my voice. The receptionist followed my gaze and asked if I needed anything else. I said that I did not. I stepped out of the building and let the glass doors close behind me. On the sidewalk, the winter air felt colder than before. I walked toward the local library. It was not far, and I had always liked that building. It had tall windows and a wide front step. I had spent many afternoons there with Clara when we were younger. Now, it was a place where I could sit and think without being in the way. Inside, the library was warm and quiet. People sat at tables with books and laptops. Children's voices came faintly from the far corner. I found a spot in the reading room, at a table near the window, and took out my notebook and a pen. This time, I decided to write more than 2 lists. On one page, I wrote a simple timeline. I started with the year Clara and I first met Mark, then the year the trust was created, then the year Ryan and Mia bought the townhouse with its help. After that, I wrote down the main moments from the past few years when I had felt a small shift. I wrote about the first time Ryan said that my apartment was too small and plain for gatherings. I wrote about the first time he suggested that maybe I should skip a party because Mia's friends would not know how to talk to me. I wrote about the comment regarding my clothes not matching the theme of one of her events. I wrote the words simply, without decoration. Then I wrote about more recent things. Short visits turned into canceled visits. Coffee became text messages. My role at gatherings shrank, first in small ways, then in larger ones, until the morning when I was told that a quiet Christmas at home alone would be best for everyone. As I wrote, the pattern became clearer. It was not one big break. It was a slow turning away, step by step. Each step had seemed small when it happened. Together, they formed a road. I turned the page and wrote Ryan's name at the top. Under it, I wrote 3 questions. What did he think I was for? Where did he think this road led? What did he think my silence meant? I did not have full answers, but I had guesses. He probably thought I would always say yes. He probably thought that loyalty meant never changing the way things were set up, no matter how I was treated. He probably believed that age meant softness, that tiredness meant weakness. I closed the notebook and sat back in the chair. Outside the window, people walked by with shopping bags and scarves. The sky was still that same flat gray. Inside, the library lights hummed softly. On my way home, I stopped by a small shop and bought a simple folder. I wanted something new to hold the notes I was making now, something separate from the old files. It felt symbolic, in a quiet way. Back in my apartment, I went straight to the study. I placed the new folder on the desk, then took the key from the drawer and opened the filing cabinet again. The same labeled folders stared back at me. This time, I took out the one that said Cole Family Trust. I sat down, placed it in front of me, and opened it. Inside were the documents Mark had prepared years ago. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the text was clear. My own name was printed in several places, along with Clara's. Ryan's name appeared later, attached to terms like beneficiary and heir. I read slowly. Old scenes passed through my mind as I went over each section. The trust described how assets would be held, how income could be used, and what rights I had as the creator and trustee. I underlined nothing. I only let the words sink in. Near the middle, there was a section about changes. It said that under certain conditions, I could adjust how and when benefits were given. It used careful, formal language. The exact sentences did not matter as much to me in that moment as the simple fact that this option existed. We had talked about this with Mark when Clara was still alive. I remembered her saying that we could not see the future, so we needed to build something flexible. She had said that if Ryan ever turned away from us, the trust should not help him hurt himself or us. Sitting there, I felt both of them with me in a strange way. Clara with her folder of numbers in the staff room, Mark with his notepad at our dining table years ago. They had tried to give me tools. I had filed those tools away and almost forgotten that I knew how to use them. I closed the trust folder and placed my hand flat on the cover. The cardboard was warm now from my touch. Next to it, on the new folder, I wrote a simple title, Current Situation. Then I took my phone and opened the calendar. I scrolled to the day Mark had suggested for our meeting and added an event. Meet Mark, review trust, and options. I set a reminder for the evening before. The act of typing those words felt like laying down a plank on a bridge. The bridge did not yet reach the other side, but it no longer ended at the edge of a cliff. In the past, when students came to me with problems, I always told them the same thing. I said that they could not change what had already happened, but they could decide what to do with what they knew. I would help them list their options, then I would step back and let them choose. Now, alone in my small study with the trust papers in front of me, I realized I had given that advice to hundreds of young people. It was time to take it myself. I met Mark 2 days later, on a gray morning that suited my mood. His office was in an older building in the center of town, with worn stone steps and a small brass sign by the door. I had climbed those steps years before with Clara at my side. This time, I climbed them alone with a folder under my arm. Inside, the waiting room smelled of paper and coffee. A young assistant greeted me and led me down a short hallway to Mark's office. When I stepped in, I saw that little had changed. The same wooden desk, the same tall shelves, the same framed photo of his dog on a beach. Mark stood up when he saw me and shook my hand. He looked a little older, with more gray at his temples, but his eyes were sharp as always. He asked how I had been. I gave him the simple answer. Work retired, health steady, family complicated. He gestured for me to sit and asked what had happened. I started from the beginning of that morning in the townhouse. I told him about the camera on the tripod, the children's drawing, the words about wanting a quiet Christmas without old tension. I kept my description calm. I did not raise my voice or search for strong phrases. I just laid out the facts, like I had done on the drive home. Mark listened in silence, his hands folded on the desk. He did not rush me. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said that it sounded like a clear pattern, not a single bad day. He said that when we had built the trust, we had talked about something like this as a distant possibility. He added that he wished we had been wrong. He reached into a drawer and took out a file with my name on it. He opened it and pulled out a copy of the trust document. It looked almost the same as the one in my filing cabinet at home, only cleaner. He turned to a marked page and pointed to a paragraph in the middle. He reminded me that we had built in a condition about ongoing relationship and respect. He said that the wording was careful on purpose. It did not talk about feelings, it talked about actions. If the grantor, meaning me, was pushed out of key family events and treated as if he did not belong, the trustee, also me, had the right to review and change how benefits were given. He spoke in simple terms. He did not use harsh descriptions for Ryan. He only described what the document allowed. He said that I could freeze Ryan's direct share and redirect future support to new accounts for the grandchildren, with rules attached. He said that we could also look at the townhouse agreement. He took another paper from the file, this one about the property. He reminded me that the trust owned the townhouse. Ryan and Mia had the right to live there, but there were conditions. One of those conditions gave me the option, under certain circumstances, to ask them to start buying the place at fair market value or to move out after a reasonable time. He said that excluding me from Christmas in such a clear way, while still using my trust name for their life, touched that section too. He did not say I had to act on it. He just said that I could. As I listened, I felt something shift inside. It was not joy, it was not relief. It was more like finally finding the exact page in a thick book that you have been searching for. The words did not solve everything, but they gave shape to the problem. Mark asked if I had any written proof of what had happened. I said that I had text messages about canceled visits and that I could write down what was said that morning in the townhouse. He suggested that I do both. He said that it was always wise to keep a clear record, even if you hoped never to use it. We agreed that the first step was simple. I would gather my notes and digital records. He would review the trust in detail and prepare some options. Then we would meet again to decide what path to take. Before I left, he asked one more question. He wanted to know what I wanted, beyond any legal result. I thought for a moment and told him that I wanted two things: not to be used as a silent support while being treated like a problem, and to make sure my grandchildren did not learn that this kind of treatment was normal. He nodded and said that those were clear aims. He reminded me that the trust was mine, and I had the right to use it in a way that matched my values, not anyone else's. He walked me to the door and told me to call if anything changed. From Mark's office, I went straight to the bank. It was a short walk, and the cold air gave me time to organize my thoughts. Inside the bank, the lines were short. An employee led me to a small office where a trust officer sat behind a screen. I explained who I was and that I wanted to review the accounts connected to the Cole Family Trust. I handed over my identification and the document Mark had given me years ago. The officer checked the computer, nodded, and confirmed that I was the primary signatory and trustee. We went through the accounts one by one. There was the main trust balance, the part connected to the townhouse, and the accounts that could be used for future education. The officer explained, as Mark had, that I could block or change distributions to Ryan, as long as I followed the terms described in the trust. I asked about payment cards linked to the trust. The officer pulled up a list and pointed out a card that had been used in the past for house repairs and some larger family expenses. I looked at the recent usage. There were no huge charges yet, but I saw one pending hold from a restaurant. The amount was not small. I felt a slow heat in my chest as I looked at the numbers. The officer asked if the charge was authorized. I said that I had not approved any recent use for a restaurant. He said that since it was a pending hold and not yet processed, it could still be blocked. I asked him to make sure that no restaurant charge went through without a call to me first. He agreed and made notes in the system. He also printed a short letter that explained the structure of the trust and my role, in case any company tried to claim payment directly from that account. When I left the bank, I had that letter in my bag and a clear picture of my position. I was not just a side figure attached to the trust by name. I was the one holding the handle. Back home, I did what Mark had suggested. I sat at my desk, connected my phone to the laptop, and began to collect my digital records. I took screenshots of text conversations where Ryan said that the children were too busy to see me, where he suggested I skip gatherings for image reasons. I captured the short note he had sent after telling me to have a quiet Christmas alone. I saved the group chat message about the big Christmas lunch at the restaurant. In that message, he had tagged the Park family and some of Mia's friends, but not me. Reading it again, I noticed the tone. It sounded like an announcement to a team, not a warm invite to relatives. I placed all the images and notes into a folder on my computer and backed it up to an external drive. Then I printed a few key messages and placed them into the new paper folder I had bought. I did not add any marks or angry notes. I just dated them and wrote short descriptions on sticky labels. Later that day, I decided to get some groceries. The small store near Ryan's townhouse was on my way, and it carried the brand of tea I liked, so I drove there. I told myself that I was not going to drive past his house. I would simply shop and go home. Inside the store, everything was busy. People moved through the aisles with full baskets, picking up last-minute items. I took my tea, some bread, and a few apples, then joined the line at the register. When I left, my hands were full, so I did not put my gloves on right away. The cold air bit at my fingers as I crossed the parking lot. I was walking toward my car when I heard a familiar voice. I turned my head and saw Helena standing a few spaces away, leaning against her vehicle with her phone to her ear. She did not see me. I did not mean to listen, but her voice carried clearly in the open space. She was laughing in a light, relaxed way. She said that this Christmas would finally be peaceful and tidy, without old problems pulling attention. She said that Mia was relieved that Ryan had found the courage to draw a line with his father, and that the lunch would be just their real family at last. I stopped walking. For a moment, I stood there with my bag in my hands, the cold creeping into my fingers. The words were simple, but they cut through any remaining doubt. In their eyes, I was not part of the real family. I was an old tie they were glad to trim. I did not speak to Helena. I did not move closer. I turned, walked to my car, and placed the grocery bag on the passenger seat. I sat there for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel, looking at nothing. My breath clouded the inside of the windshield. In that quiet, I went back over the facts again, like a teacher reviewing a lesson. My son had told me to stay away from Christmas. His partner's mother now spoke about my absence as a blessing, and somewhere a restaurant expected payment from a trust I controlled. The pattern was no longer just in my notebook. It lived in their voices, in their plans, in the way they spoke when they thought I was not there. I drove home slowly. Back in my study, I put the groceries away and sat down at the desk. I looked at the folders, the old trust papers, the new notes. One held past plans, the other held present reality. Between them, my hand rested on the wood. I opened my laptop to check my email. There were a few normal messages: a newsletter from the library, a note from Nora asking how I was holding up, a reminder from some store I had once ordered from. Then I saw one with the restaurant's name in the subject line. I clicked it. The message thanked Cole Family Trust for being the payment source for the upcoming Christmas lunch. It said that the reservation was confirmed and that the final amount would be charged to the trust card at the end of the meal. I stared at the screen. The words were polite, formal, and completely sure of my role. In that moment, I understood something very clear. In their minds, I was out of the picture as a person. I was only still present as a line on a payment form. My hand moved to the mouse. I did not reply to the email. I simply dragged it into a folder with the same calm care I had used for the screenshots. Then I picked up my pen and wrote one more line in my notebook. They expect me to pay for the meal they do not want me to attend? I woke up early the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because my mind had already begun working before my eyes opened. The room was dim, the winter light still waiting behind the curtains. I lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the radiator. Then I sat up, rubbed my face, and let out a slow breath. It was time to decide. I made coffee and sat at the table with my notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. What happens next is my choice. It looked simple on paper, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened in the past month, the past year, maybe even the past decade. When the coffee was done, I gathered the folders, old trust documents, new notes, printed screenshots, and placed them in a neat stack. I looked at the stack for a few seconds, then stood up and put on my coat. I was going back to Mark's office. The streets were quiet, and a thin layer of frost covered the parked cars. As I walked up the stone steps to Mark's building, I felt a calmness settle over me. Not peace, exactly, more like the steady feeling you get when you know your next step clearly. His assistant greeted me and led me in. Mark looked up from his desk when I entered, and I could see he had already pulled out the trust file. He gestured for me to sit, and I placed the stack of folders between us. He asked how I was. I answered honestly, not angry, not confused, just clear. I told him I was ready to make changes. He nodded and opened the trust file to the section we had reviewed earlier. He went over the options again, slowly, making sure every detail was understood. He asked if I wanted to freeze Ryan's benefits. I said yes. He asked if I wanted to redirect future support to education accounts for Leo and Ava. Again, yes. He asked if I wanted to adjust the townhouse arrangement, give Ryan the option to buy it or plan to move out. I paused before answering that one. I told him I did not want to harm the children, but I could not continue as a silent provider while being erased. Mark said something that stayed with me. Not acting teaches them the wrong lesson, too. I nodded. He prepared the documents with practiced hands. He printed a set of trust amendments, each with clear language. He included the reason for the changes: public exclusion of the grantor from a major family event. He showed me where to sign, and I did so with a steady hand. Then he printed the notice regarding the townhouse. It explained that the current living arrangement would change and that Ryan had a set period to begin the process of buying the house at fair market value or preparing to leave. It was not sudden or cruel. It followed every rule. When I signed that document, I felt a small shift inside me, not joy, not victory, but something cleaner, like a window had been opened. Before I left, we planned one more step. Mark said that the changes would be most effective and most clearly understood if delivered in a setting where the same people who had watched the exclusion could witness the correction. He suggested bringing the notices to the Christmas lunch. The room grew still when he said it. I thought for a moment. Then I nodded. We agreed that Mark would be nearby during the event. Not in the middle of it, but close enough if and when I needed him to read statements formally. We had done things quietly so far. The reveal would not be loud, but it would be seen. It would match the tone of the original moment. On my way out, Mark handed me a small envelope containing clean copies of the documents. "Keep these with you," he said, "but do not show them to anyone until you are ready." I thanked him and walked back into the cold. After leaving the office, I went straight to the bank again. I spoke with the same trust officer, who now had the amended instructions sent over from Mark. We reviewed each change. He confirmed the freeze, the redirection to the children's accounts, and the new rules for any future charges. I signed a few more forms, initialed margins, and dated entries. Then he handed me a formal letter addressed to the restaurant explaining that the trust card was not authorized for any charges connected to the Christmas lunch. I put the letter into my coat pocket. When I stepped outside, the sun was low and pale, but it was there. It cast a thin line of light across the sidewalk. I stood still for a moment and let the cold air fill my lungs. The world felt different, not because the facts had changed, but because I had. From the bank, I walked to a small family restaurant a few streets away. Nora had already texted to ask if I could meet her there. Inside, she was sitting at a booth with her coat draped over the back of the seat and a half-finished cup of tea in front of her. She looked up when I approached, and her eyes scanned my face. She asked if everything had gone as planned. I told her yes, and she let out a small breath of relief. I placed the folder on the table between us and summarized the decisions. The freeze, the redirection, the townhouse notice. I told her that I would bring the documents to the Christmas lunch and speak calmly, then step away. She listened with her fingers wrapped around the warm mug. When I finished, she nodded and said that this was long overdue. She reminded me of something she had told me months ago, that love does not mean letting others walk over you. She reached over and touched my arm. Her hand was warm. A few minutes later, Mark walked in, still in his coat. He joined us and went over the final details. He said that he would be nearby at the restaurant entrance on the day of the lunch. He would not step in unless I asked. He wanted the moment to belong to me. We talked quietly for another half hour. No dramatic phrases, no predictions. Only steps, conditions, and clarity. When they both left, I sat alone in the booth for a moment and looked at the folder. It felt heavier now, but not in a way that pressed down on me. More like it grounded me. Driving home, I kept the radio off. The silence helped me think. The sky was darker now, but not fully night. The stores were busy with people rushing in and out, carrying bags and talking loudly. Christmas songs drifted out of open doors. In my apartment, I placed the documents on the desk and sat down slowly. My hands were steady. I picked up my phone and checked it. No new messages from Ryan. The last message was still the one telling me he hoped I would understand. I charged the phone, then set it face down again. Later that evening, I walked out onto my small balcony. A neighbor below me had put up strings of lights shaped like stars. Someone across the courtyard was practicing a song on a piano. Their notes floated through the cold air like soft ripples. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold. I thought about the Christmas mornings when Ryan was little, running down the stairs, shouting for me to come see what Santa had brought. I thought about the way he clung to my side at Clara's funeral, the way he used to ask if I was going to be okay. Those memories did not vanish because of what he had done. They still lived inside me, but they no longer excused what had happened this year. The next day, I spent the morning cleaning my apartment. Not because it needed it badly, but because I needed something simple to do with my hands. I dusted the shelves, wiped the counters, folded laundry, and straightened the books. When I reached the frame with Clara's handwriting on the back, I lifted it for a moment and pressed my thumb over the words. After lunch, I ironed a shirt and set it aside for the Christmas lunch. I was not dressing up for them. I was dressing for the moment. A moment where I would speak calmly, clearly, and honestly in front of the same group that had watched me be pushed out. Near evening, I sat in the car outside my building and checked the folder one last time. The documents were crisp and in order. The envelope from the bank was tucked neatly inside. My notes were clipped at the back. I placed everything on the passenger seat and rested both hands on the steering wheel. The street outside was quiet. A few windows were lit. Someone walked a dog across the way, the leash glowing faintly under a streetlight. I knew that once I stepped into that restaurant, things would not go back to how they were. The story would not rewind itself. But there was something steady in me now, an understanding that doing nothing would also have changed things, only in a way that led nowhere good. I looked down at my phone. The screen was dark. I turned it on for a moment, saw the empty call log, then turned it off again. Tomorrow would be the lunch. Tomorrow I would walk into a room where I was not supposed to exist. Tomorrow I would speak. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, I felt no fear in that thought. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes before noon. The building stood on a corner, tall windows glowing with warm light. Cars lined the curb, some I recognized from Mia's family, some I did not. The air was cold enough that each breath left a small cloud in front of me. I straightened my coat, took the folder from the passenger seat, and walked toward the entrance. Inside the lobby, everything was bright and polished. A small tree stood near the host stand, decorated with simple gold ornaments. People in neat clothes moved through the space, speaking quietly. The scent of roasted vegetables and warm bread drifted in the air. A server approached me with a gentle smile and asked if I was here for the private holiday lunch. I said yes, and she told me to follow her. We walked down a short hallway, carpet soft under our steps. As we approached the private dining room, I heard voices from inside. Laughter, glasses clinking, and Ryan's voice leading a cheerful toast. The door was partly open, and I paused for a brief moment before entering. Inside, the room shimmered with decorations. A long table was set with bright plates and folded napkins. At the head of the table stood Ryan, raising his glass. Mia sat beside him, smiling for the benefit of the phones pointed her way. Victor and Helena sat near the center, talking quietly with another couple. Leo and Ava were in small chairs at the end of the table, leaning forward to see something their cousin was holding. My sudden appearance caused a shift. A few phones lowered. Several faces turned toward me with surprise. Ryan's smile faltered for a second before he spoke. He said my name in a tone caught between confusion and discomfort. Mia straightened in her seat, her fingers tightening around her napkin. I stepped inside, closed the door softly behind me, and offered a polite greeting to the room. I told the server, in a calm voice, that I would only need a moment before she brought any plates. Then I looked at Ryan. He lowered his glass slowly and asked what I was doing there. His voice stayed light but tense. He said he thought we had agreed that this lunch would be simple this year. I did not raise my tone. I simply said that I had come to correct a misunderstanding. A ripple went through the room. Victor sat up straighter. Helena looked down at her fork. Mia cleared her throat and said that this was not the time for complicated topics. I assured her that I intended no disruption. I was here only to explain something that involved the restaurant. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the envelope from the bank. I handed it to the restaurant manager, who had stepped into the doorway when he heard the shift in the room. I told him that the Cole Family Trust was not authorized for any charges connected to this event. I explained quietly and clearly that no approval had been given to attach the trust card to the reservation. The manager nodded, reading the letter quickly, and thanked me. He said he understood and would make sure billing reflected the change. I thanked him for his help and turned back to the table. A tense silence filled the room. Mia's face had gone very still. Victor adjusted his jacket. Helena folded her hands in her lap. Ryan asked carefully what I meant by change. He said that they had arranged everything already and that the restaurant had confirmed the reservation. I told him that the confirmation had been sent, but not by me, and that the trust would not be covering costs for an event I was told not to attend. His eyes flickered as if he had been caught in a light he did not expect. Before he could respond, I reached into the folder and placed 2 documents on the table, one in front of Ryan, one next to it. My movements were slow and steady, the way I used to set down tests in front of students. I told him these were formal notices, that all changes followed the rules of the trust he had once thanked me for building. The room stayed silent except for a faint clink of glass as someone shifted in their seat. I explained, still calmly, that his portion of the trust had been frozen. I told him that future support would now go directly to education accounts for Leo and Ava. These funds could help with school and later studies, but would not pass through him. It was a quiet redirection, not a punishment, simply a correction of a pattern that had gone on too long. Mia's lips parted as if to speak, but the words did not come out. Ryan stared at the papers. His hands did not touch them. He said that this felt sudden, that he wished I had warned him, that he did not understand why I was doing this today. I said that I was doing it today because the exclusion had happened today, in front of others, and that I was following the same structure they had created, a public moment that required a public correction. Then I placed the townhouse notice on the table. This time, the reaction was visible. Mia's breath caught. Victor leaned forward with a frown. Ryan's chair scraped slightly as he shifted back. I told him that the living arrangement would now change according to the original agreement. He would have a period, reasonable and clearly stated, to begin buying the townhouse at fair market value or prepare to move out. It was not sudden, it was not harsh. It was simply the path laid out in the document he had once agreed to. I did not mention the parking lot conversation I had overheard. I did not mention the drawing Leo had made for me. I did not mention the months of canceled visits and soft exclusions. The documents spoke for themselves. At that moment, Mark stepped quietly into the doorway. I had asked him to stay out of the dining room unless needed. He stayed near the wall, hands clasped, not intruding, but serving as confirmation that every paper on the table was real. Ryan looked at him with a mix of disbelief and fear. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand apology. I simply explained that the trust had been built on relationship, not image, and that when I was told I did not belong, the structure shifted. Then I turned to Leo and Ava, who had gone quiet when the adults' tones changed. I knelt beside their chairs and spoke softly, so the whole room did not need to hear everything. I told them that I loved them, that nothing about these documents changed the way I felt, and that their future would still be cared for. I said that grown-ups sometimes made choices that had consequences, and that those consequences were not their fault. Leo nodded slowly, his eyes wide. Ava reached out and touched my sleeve. When I stood up again, Mia asked if this was really necessary. Her voice trembled at the edges. She said that this was supposed to be a celebration. I answered that I agreed, but that a celebration should include honesty, not silence. Victor started to speak, but Mark stepped forward slightly and said that all documents were final and followed the letter of the trust. His tone was polite but firm. I closed the folder, placed it under my arm, and looked at the table one last time. The room felt different now, lighter in some places, heavier in others. The decorations still shimmered, but the performance was over. I told them I wished them a good meal. Then I walked to the door. No one stopped me. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the first waves of confusion behind me. Low voices, questions, chairs shifting, but I did not turn back. I walked through the lobby, past the small tree with its gold ornaments, and out into the cold afternoon. The sky had turned a pale silver, and a few flakes drifted down, melting as they touched the ground. I reached my car, opened the door, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The folder lay on the passenger seat, its edge catching the light. My hands were steady. For 2 days after that, my phone stayed off. I did not check messages. I did not open email. I let the silence rest around me like a blanket. When I finally turned the phone back on, the screen lit up bright in the dim room. Notifications poured in. Texts, voicemails, missed calls. At the top of the screen were the numbers I had expected. 25 missed calls. I set the phone down on my desk, beside the stamped trust amendments and the townhouse notice, and watched the screen glow and fade as the calls quieted. Outside, the snow kept falling in slow, soft flakes.